All right, Coach Lee here with my last video on pacing. I promise it is something that we do not discuss enough. There should be thousands of videos being talked about every day about pacing in the cycling world, in the running world, in the swimming world. But we just don't see it. There's tons of research that has been done on pacing, but we just don't see enough of it. So this is my most dominant subject that I talk about as a coach. I talk about hydration. I talk about nutrition. I talk about all these elements of performance for you to get the best on your race day. Pacing is one of those ones that I practice myself, that I study myself, that I want you to do the very same thing. And one of the best ways is Strava segments. I think of Strava segments as like math problems. I hate math, but right, they're just these individual problems that you can solve, right? You can go race a Strava segment with a tailwind. You can go race a Strava segment with a headwind. What happens? Well, you can go race a climb. You race a climb with flat top, right? There's all these different Strava segments that can really mimic your race day performance. And you have to solve these problems. You have to solve all the problems of performance, right? But these are like little math problems. And to get to the moon, you've got to solve 1,000 math problems to get to the moon. To win your race, you've got to solve 1,000 individual problems to get your best performance on that race. Will it translate into a podium? Well, I hope so. That's what I work towards with those clients who are podium chasers. But it's all about performance, and it's all about getting your best performance on the day. So here's another Strava segment that I raced the other day. It's not very far from my house, but it's been attempted by a lot of people. It's 1,000 people, 4,000 attempts. And as you can see, it's a fascinating Strava segment because it has this long descent, climb, descent, climb, descent, climb, descent, climb once again. And to really understand and wrap our minds around this Strava segment, we do have to look at some physics behind the whole situation. So, right, here's how speed works on a bike. So there you are on your bike. You have power. That's going to push you forward. But you got all these things working against you. You got gravity working against you. The biggest thing working against you is aerodynamic drag. Then you have rolling resistance, and that's a huge problem as well. And in the last, 5 to 8 years, a lot of strides have been made in a really super positive direction. So for instance, when I started doing all this, I had 18 millimeter tires. We pump it up to 120 PSI and we would just bounce, right? The whole day we're just bouncing. It's a very rough ride. But now what all the research has found, that with a wider rim, a bigger tire, lower pressure, that you can actually go faster because it's smoother. So instead of going like this all day long, you're actually just gliding as glass, right? And so, guys in the professional peloton, they'll train on 32s, but they'll often race on 28s with like a 75 PSI. That's so different than what it was all those years ago. But the basic physics of how you go forward has some pretty profound implications for cycling. So you're out there, you're doing a Strava climb. The best thing to do is, because of the gravity, because your power, gravity, aerodynamic drag is obviously greatly reduced. But when you're going up a climb, this is when watts most translate to speed. So if you want to go twice as fast, you drop twice the watt bomb. Now, here is when you want to go flat, or you're slightly going downhill, or really going downhill twice as fast. You got to drop some major watt bombs, up to 8 times the watt bomb, just to get that power. So how does this look at on a series of rollers? Taking all of this into account, taking that watts translate most closely on the climbs, they starts to really spread apart on flats and descents. So if you're going out and you're doing a Strava segment that looks like this, right? You might want it. Well, no, this is really what you do have to do. You have to go harder on the climbs, FTP plus, then here you're FTP minus, then you're here once again, FTP plus, then you're maybe FTP, and then, this is 180, but you would really just want to give it all you got into the end. But this kind of strategy and this kind of thinking on a day, like if you're in a long gran fondo, in a TT or something of that nature, this is a great way to understand your pacing strategy. And kind of the general rule of thumb is, climbs over 3%, consider adding 10%. Descents over 3%, consider reducing 10%. And that's what this strategy right here is, just, a castle in the sky kind of recreation of that strategy. So one of the things that I do whenever I race a Strava segment, or whenever I go into a race, I'm always looking at my history. Like, we don't talk about that enough either. Always look at your history. What have you done? What have you done in similar efforts, similar events, similar Strava segments? So I always go back. And so I've done that segment quite a few times. So I had quite a long history. I mean, I think I've done that thing like 50 times. I think that's what I was able to find in all of my data going back to 2012. The next thing I do is I examine my current bests, okay? So I have a great chart that will show me what are my current bests, the last 30, 60, 90 days. I look at where I'm at. The length of the climbs that I'm going to be doing for that segment, they're roughly about 2.5 minutes. And so that's kind of the range that I was looking at for what are my last 30 days best at the 2.5 minute range, 60 and 90 days. All right. Then form a strategy. I had a strategy based on the physics that we were just talking about. And then lastly, I use that lap button. I think 8 times in a 5-mile segment, right? That's a lot, but I use that lap button to understand exactly the watt bombs that I'm dropping and making sure that I'm hitting my power. All right, so here is the climb itself. Again, we have this long descent. We have this, it goes up. Basically, it's 4 climbs. And that's the title of the Strava segment, 4 climbs. When I did this previously, I wanted to test another strategy. I wanted to throw all that physics discussion out the door. And what would happen if I just tried to race it flat? Like on the descents, I would have a high wattage. I would try to match that wattage on the climb, try to match that wattage on the descent, try to have all the same across the board as close as possible. So this was my first effort. I gunned it down this hill, had a 339 on that climb, gunned it down this hill again, had a 322 here, gunned it down the climb again, had a 324 here, gunned it down. I was at 295 for this last one. So that speaks to my repeatability, that in this effort, I did not at the time have the repeatability to put out a good number on that last climb. But also, I just didn't have the time to relax and to recover. Even though it might be, 30, 40, 50 seconds to recover, I just didn't give myself that time to recover on the descents, okay? So I go back, I do it again. My first time was over that 5-mile segment was 15 minutes, 291 watts. I came back, didn't go, just under my pacing strategy on this descent. Gun this. My idea was that I thought that I could do about somewhere in the 340s 4 times over and over again for about a 2.5 minute segment. And so that was my pacing strategy going into this. And so here we go. This was 348 for here. That causes a little problems. That shakes things up a little bit. Then 367 here, then 345 here. And you can see how my repeatability is a lot better on this effort, and 359 here. And then when I did get to the end, I was wiped out. Like I had no more to give. And so the numbers that I chose through this whole event were pretty spot on, because when I got to the top of that, I was doing my last anaerobic sprint. And if this thing had gone on another half mile, I would have been totally trashed. Okay. So the idea is that, with the proper pacing strategy for this, easier on the descents, harder on the climbs, I was able to produce an average watts of 316 watts for the entire segment and go 1440, a lot faster than my previous time. This is a very raced Strava segment, so I did not get the KOM on this day. I was sitting at 8th on this Strava segment before and taking 40 a big chunk of time out of this. I'm still sitting at 8th, and if I want to get to like 4th or 3rd position, I'm going to have to take off 20 seconds. So I'm going to have to come back here with a little more fitness, a little more oomph, and just do that same pacing strategy again. And I think that I will nail it. Again, I love these pacing strategies. I have a whole bunch of links down in the show notes about different pacing videos that I've done. Pacing is absolutely crucial, and using Strava to dial in your pacing strategy can be pretty advantageous for you as an athlete. All right, guys, I am a full-time coach. I'm not a part-time coach. I'm not an electrical engineer on the side. This is what I do full-time. Reach out to me. My contact information is below. Reach out to me and let's talk. If coaching is right for you, let's talk pacing. Let's talk strategy for your events. All right.